So, hi and welcome. My name is Kevin Bishop, and I'm director of the organization Cuatro Puntos in Hartford, Connecticut. And with us today, we have Patrick Nicoletti, the chair of Human Development and Family Studies at the University of St. Joseph, who's working with us on this project with the University of St. Joseph, who's our partner with Cuatro Puntos for the project called Through the Eyes of Children. With us, we also have Dan Callister, who is the chairman of the National Campaign to Stop Violence and Do the Right Thing. And then we also have Amin Mokdad, who is composer for the project Through the Eyes of Children. So I'm going to ask Dan to get started by telling us a little bit about Do the Right Thing and the great and amazing work that you do.
Well, thank you very much. Happy to answer questions and thrilled about the work that you've been doing with us. When I was a full-time practicing lawyer many years ago, I think over 25, in Washington, D.C., I read a newspaper article in the Washington Post. Two students had gotten into a fight, and according to the Washington Post, it was about a pair of tennis shoes. One picked up a stone and killed the other student. And that struck me as horrible, but also probably a very superficial explanation of what really led to that horrible event. And so I was talking to my kids later that night and asking them about that article. At the time I had 5 kids, and one of them, who his name is Joshua, and he was 11 at the time, he looked me straight in the eye and he said, I have 2 questions for you, Dad. I said, oh, okay, what? He said, one, are you just making conversation, or do you really care to know the answer to your question? And when your 11-year-old son asks you a question like that, you really have to ask yourself, well, do I care? I was a successful lawyer, and my kids lived in a upper-class neighborhood, and they didn't face the kind of problems that probably led to the violence that was spoken about in the Washington Post. The second question was, if you really do care, you're probably asking the wrong kids. You should be asking kids who come from more troubled situations and more troubled neighborhoods. So, I had some decisions to make, and I made some decisions and went to some friends and talked about it. And literally that was what started the program we call Do the Right Thing, which now is the National Campaign to Stop Violence. And the idea was to ask young people themselves what causes youth violence and what experiences have they had in their life that might lead them to become a violent person, and what can they personally do about it. And that was how the program got started. It started with going to the mayor of Washington at the time, Sharon Pratt Dixon, I believe her name was, and saying, we've got some questions we'd love to ask. We'd love to get written answers. Would the school be interested? And I think she told me that we could try, but that no one would write any answers because they were too busy trying to get these students to write answers that were normal school type questions. But we did submit the questions to the students in some of the middle schools, same age as my son, and we got some very profound answers. And those essays started the program, and then it went from there. That's a long answer to your question, Kevin.
Thank you so much. So yeah, with our program here, just so everybody knows, what we were doing is we've taken some of the essays that these students have written in the last year. They're 2021 essays, and we've got recordings of the students reading them out loud and then doing musical responses to those. And it's going to be a live event as well as an album that will be released on all the streaming services like Spotify and all of that. And then we'll also have a series of 16 videos. So maybe if Amin or Patrick want to jump in and talk a little more about the project or about how, the power of the essays that you've read and what they mean, how they relate to the project.
Sure, if I can, and I'm really fascinated because, in some ways it's almost like a research project, getting the opportunity to find out from kids who are in these circumstances, their experience and perceptions. Were there any particularly, significant things that you gathered from looking at all those essays over time?
Is that a question for me?
Yes.
Yeah. I've learned a heck of a lot about what are the reasons that someone becomes a violent person. To quickly summarize, it's often a modeling behavior based on their seeing an older person behave in that way to address a problem. And, there's a couple of ways you can solve problems in life. You can communicate, you can work through them, or you can become angry and then maybe in terms violent. And if you've been around people, unfortunately, maybe your parents or older siblings, or just you don't have an adult in your life, gangs or whoever you associate with, if they're solving their problems using violence, and you can very easily become a person who does the same thing. And so we have seen a lot of that in terms of responses. We've also seen a lot of responses about our culture, our American culture, how we entertain ourselves. We spend a lot of time looking at violent things, whether they are video games or movies or TV shows. And so we're exposed to it very heavily from a very early age. And a lot of kids, of course, are not in a position where, they have someone in their life who is telling them, hey, that's not really how you go about dealing with problems. So yeah, those are some of the significance. The other thing that we've learned is, and this was the surprise to me, how cathartic it is for a person who's been a victim to talk about it or write about it in our case, and think and hope that by writing about it, it may prevent something like this from happening to others. Because then you get past, oh, I had a bad thing happen to me, and you turn it into something more positive in your life, which is, I can grow from this, I can be resilient, I can help others. And that's very cathartic to young people, by the way. We've had thousands of parents come to us and say, you don't know how you've helped my child by just giving them this opportunity to get this thing behind them a little bit more than it might have been otherwise.
Yeah, I see that I work with at-risk teens, and for a variety of topics, sometimes denial and not talking about things is, families superstitiously believe that if they don't touch it, it doesn't exist, or they'll be shielded somehow, which of course isn't true. And I think some of us also come from generations in which a host of things really weren't talked about very much, and you were just kind of on your own to manage it. So I can really see how that could come about, that having the opportunity to actually express something about is cathartic, as you're saying, or sometimes it's the missing therapy that should have happened for kids who've seen more graphic things in their communities and lives than, now if something happens at a school, we immediately get kids into counseling, but there's a whole host of things they experience that we don't have that call. In that same vein, did you find yourself adjusting your approach to young people and the questions that you were asking them to answer as you learned more about their experience?
We never changed the questions. to answer that point. We ask the same questions today that we asked 25 years ago. The program is primarily run by local chairpersons and local committees, and they do all kinds of follow-up with students, as do the teachers who discover things sometimes. And there's a lot of adjustment that goes on at that level as we've learned things. But in terms of the basic framework of the program, we've found that those three questions, how has violence affected your life? What do you think are the causes, and what do you think you personally can do about it, seem to be the right questions, at least for what we're trying to do, which is really educate ourselves. I mean, the program started off, the idea was to educate me and other adults like me, who might not have as much experience with this, as to what's going on, and motivate people to go get engaged, to do something, whatever, without telling them what to do. Look, I've run into a problem. My phone is about to die, and where I'm located, I don't have time. Hello? Yeah, I think I've lost you.
No, can hear you now.
Yeah.
Yeah, can we pick this up at some other point? Because I'm going to lose you in about 1 minute.
You are muted, Kevin.
Can you hear me?
Thank you so much for your time. Yeah, we'll keep in touch.
All right. Sorry about this. Sorry.
We can continue with our conversation with Patrick and Amin, though.
Yeah.
Well,
Thank
you so much for your time, and we look forward to the event.
Take care, Kevin. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, I'm sorry. I was about to say that I was capitalizing on all his time and it wasn't giving you a chance to get in there. My apologies.
No, it's okay. I was thinking about your questions also, and it leads me to something very important. I wanted to ask him, and I can ask you also, how to create this awareness about this is violence. Because, for instance, in Iraq, we have a lot of bad things happening, and the people doesn't really realize it as a violence, So even when you ask them these questions about how did violence affected on your life and so on, they will not really know what to write about because they don't see it as a violence. I just mentioned to Kevin before my story with the teachers when I used to be in the primary and the secondary school. They used to use this violence with us. And when I complain or I talk about it, I have every year the same post about the teachers with the names about what they did to me. The community doesn't really see it as something bad. So how do you create this? This is something very interesting.
Sure. I think it's a great question. I actually come from a very at-risk background in my community, where you would hear gunshots every day. So if you were going to pay attention to that, then you get nothing done. So yeah. The only question is how close, and am I immediately at risk? If that doesn't apply, then you go about your business, including walking around outside and doing whatever else you needed to get done.
Yeah.
And I think I grew up across several major American cities. And one thing that happens is that you do acclimate to both the good things that are offered in a city, the variety and, cultural institutions and, and other things, dynamic environment. But at the same time, you also get accustomed to a lot of the harsh realities of living in a city, crowding, lack of sanitary circumstances, the possibility of danger. You get accustomed to those things, and I would be in a major city, and then I would leave for a while to go teach at some university out in the countryside, and I would almost be bewildered, like a good urban person, like it's too quiet out here. What's wrong? And then I would come back into the major city and I would be overwhelmed temporarily. And then I would get accustomed to it again. So, and I think especially youth who are growing up in a place that has seen a lot of disruption and war, and we see this in other countries as well, that the threshold for acknowledging violence, danger, etc. One of the things that I do when I work with urban populations is to make sure they understand the consequences of some of the things that their kids are experiencing that they may not consider violence, including things like bullying, as an example. Well, this is just kids being kids. But then when I show them the data on the mental health impact that it has, and how it can derail a lot of kids from having a productive life, or it increases their violence, or it increases their likelihood of contact with law enforcement, they look at it differently after that. And it's a learning curve. It's a learning curve because it defies their experience during their lifetime of how things were defined. And so we in America, we have some progress with that in some areas. We've come far in terms of our appreciation of the impact of bullying, such that most school systems, for instance, have an explicit policy of not tolerating it. That doesn't mean they follow it through, but they at least have the policy part in place. And kids who act as bullies are being held more accountable. Kids who are victimized as bullies are increasingly likely to get treatment. People appreciate that it can have a longer term impact. I even ask my students now, I said, can you remember being bullied as a child? And these students are, in my case, from 20 to 30, and they remember. And I tell them, that tells you all you need to know, that all these years later, you still remember. So it was significant, no matter how you're being raised, it was significant to you. Imagine what's going on with kids right now. So it's a learning curve. You have to help people get on it. And it doesn't happen overnight because some people will resist. They like their nostalgia and how they've rationalized things for their generation. They're very attached to that. But if you help them see the outcomes out of concern for their children, they will change.
Yeah, this is very great. I mean, you are very true and right, because when I talk about teacher in a bad way, I mean, not a bad way, I'm just saying the facts, the people start to attack me because, oh, this is the holy, I mean, the teacher and the culture here, it's like holy person, like, oh, this is the person who made me, or this is the person. So they are, as you said, they are attached to it, and they feel this nostalgic, like, no, this teacher, like, even, I mean, it's kind of sadistic thing. But this is the fact, and people are really attached to it in a way that they say, even I feel very honored, or kind of we owe them a lot because of their whatever abusing, we become doctors or become engineers. So they don't really see, like, and they believed it because of the fear that they create in our lives. We become doctors because we were scared of their punishment and end up become as doctor. But I say, okay, you are a doctor, but you have a mental problems. When you treat patients, you treat them very, very bad. You are amazing doctor as in a scientific perspective, but in the human perspective, they don't have mercy. Here, the doctors are butchers. We all tell them, doctor. I mean, I have friends, doctors, and they are butchers. And I just tell them, like, they don't really treat people like humans, So because they were the most people who got abused in their childhood to force them to become doctors. So the worst ones is the most intelligence, let's say, are the highest degrees in the community is the worst ones. So it's really crazy.
No, I know what you're talking about, and I came from a community where that was very true. And it was, we have a saying here, spare the rod, spoil the child. The rod, you beat them with the rod. Spare it. If you don't use it, you're going to ruin that person. Yeah. So we have that tradition. But yes, you're right. It creates another generation of cruelty. But let's think about a more simple circumstance. Parents who use physical punishment. And there's a great argument about parents using physical punishment, including, spank the child, right?
Yeah.
But I'm able to show them that you can measure almost the more you use that, the more you have a child who uses violence. The less you use that, the less violent your child tends to be. Some of it's modeling. What do you do when you're having a conflict with another person? Well, you do what your parents do. You use physical aggression.
Yeah.
But also, very important, parents who instead, we have a thing called inductive reasoning, where you discuss the situation. It makes traditional parents crazy, okay? Because they say, I'm not going to discuss when the child is bad. No discussion. You get a beating. Wow. Okay. Yeah. No discussion.
Yeah.
However, they are denying their child the ability to think for themselves. You can beat a child, and while the parent is present, the child will be very obedient. They don't want to get hit. Okay.
Yeah.
But if the parent is not there, teachers will tell you they act crazy because they have to have that authority present to follow through that message. Yeah. So they don't know how to think for themselves, what to do in a situation. It's called out of sight compliance. The highest out of sight, that is when parents aren't around, when teachers not in the classroom, the highest levels are for students who can think through a situation for themselves. Should I act good or should I act bad? Physical discipline takes that away. It's the child who gets practice talking with you about what should I do in a situation. Those children are the most obedient when there's no adults around. And that's what we all want. I work with parents whose children are out of control. And I ask them, well, what do you want? And they'll say, I want them to act, better. And I'll say, fine. Are you willing to do anything it takes? Now, of course, what they think I mean is, are you willing to beat them harder? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
No. Are you willing to talk to them about the situation and what they should really do? And they're like, oh, that's even more painful. That's worse for them. It's like, oh, you're asking me to change what I'm used to doing. And plus they'll say, if I don't spank them, everyone's going to say, I don't care. I let them do whatever they want. But it's not true. And they discover within 6 weeks, 7 weeks, that the child begins to change. Because you're having conversation, asking questions. Do you think it's good that you break things, are too loud, that you pick on your brothers and sisters? And the kid will typically say, no, that isn't good. That's not good. Yeah. So you ask, what are we going to do? What can we do about that so that doesn't happen? And the kid starts to think of solutions. Sometimes the solutions are silly, okay? Then they're not going to work. But you'd be amazed how often they come up with things that will work. And that is a very different pathway. to
Yeah.
beating them. And it sticks. It stays with them.
Yeah, because they will practice on thinking. They will use their brains in a way in the early age, so later they will have solutions in worse situations. But if you just dictate them and you have this sharp monologue with them, do this and not do this, and if you did this, you will get punished, and so on. We will have a really stupid future because, and this is what we have. I mean, in my country, I mean, my parents become from a cultured, educated, but they also think like beating is something we have to do from time to time. But till now, I still remember, and it still affects on me in a way or another. And we were talking, me and Kevin, about it, that it's a chain, and I was spending a lot of my time just to break the chain, because bullying, violence is a chain. Like everybody will treat everybody like I got treated before, and it's very rare that someone really break the chain from inside the community, because he will be or she will be like a foreigner in a weird country. Like, you don't use violence, you don't hit your kids, you speak with the kids. No, you have to punish them. So yeah, and this is what I feel all the time. Very weird, and everybody was like, when I lay down and try to be the same tall with the kid and talk with the kid and wise way, or like I'm talking with an adult, like respecting the brain of the person who's in front of me, they all look at me like, what is this? Like the same like when you talk with a dog or with a cat, they understand you and they get it, but they will choose to follow or not to follow. But this is the way that you give the thing and you get a reaction. Yeah, so yeah, but I got a lot of good ideas from you now.
Well, and what's interesting too, the data, research shows that those kids who learn to think for themselves will influence their peers. Because they get together and they make bad decisions sometimes, okay?
Yeah.
And that's because nobody has any practice thinking things through. So they let other things decide, like, who's the toughest and who's the tallest and who's the loudest. But if a kid has practice thinking things through, they're more likely to challenge doing something violent and say, there's another way to do this. So we have research that shows that. And if you can persuade people that the research is showing us the way. But now, I usually have families who are desperate. Their kid has been thrown out of school a few times. Maybe they had to have the police over to the house because things got out of control. So they're often more willing to listen to me at that point. Okay, they don't care about tradition or anything, and they've had enough. Give me any idea. Some school systems are like that. When they look at the violence that is going on in their school, they will change because nothing is working. So they're more open. I don't know about Iraq, because I think there is research about countries that have faced war and devastation, and you have seen ridiculous levels of violence and death. And that impacts the culture in very important ways. So this is also a conversation about international efforts to address these issues. After World War II, there was research in Europe because many of the children became hyper aggressive, hyper violent. Of course. Oh my God. I mean, a third of them lost their parents. Okay.
Yeah.
They had all witnessed war and death directly. Their parents were depressed and not necessarily following through their role as parents, as you would expect. But you're not surprised because war was still impacting them.
Yeah.
So these are some special circumstances that also need to be taken consideration when we're talking about Iraq, I believe. And there's a lot of unrest in your area that makes violence, it throws off the scale, doesn't it? It's like when you have large numbers of death and destruction, it makes things going on in your neighborhood or your house not such a big deal. But it is, because it starts there. Matter of fact, I've been fascinated by people who commit crimes of violence, and you look into their childhood, and there's often violence in the home, violence at school, violence in the neighborhood, so that they didn't suddenly just become violent.
Yeah.
You know, they were trained, they were cultivated.
Yeah. You're right.
When you bring this information to people, they tend to look at things in a new way. And I think that the voices of these kids are important because it's the missing ingredient. Even now, here we are talking about them in the third person.
Yeah.
And what's often missing is their account of what happened. When I was a kid, forgive me for telling these stories, but when I was a kid, there was an accident with a bus and a train. And I lost almost my entire class of classmates, 30 kids, okay? At that time, the way to deal with that was to not talk about it. And so recently, like 4 or 5 years ago, I realized that there was a blog. There was a blog from my old hometown. And, you know, people talking about the past and what it was like in school and all that stuff. Well, there was a blog from 2 of the students who were my classmates. Their lives were ruined. Their lives were ruined. They never got over that. At the time, nobody spoke about it. And it contributed to them having a very at-risk life. And their account, their description, was the missing ingredient when that accident happened. Because everybody thought they could just ignore it, get on with their lives. But those young people then, they were stuck. They got stuck. They never recovered. They had terrible lives. I mean, I got lucky. I mean, I'm gonna call it luck. In particular, they put me in a grade higher, not a grade lower. They put me in a grade higher because there was nobody left to have class with, so they put me a grade higher. And I was so busy keeping up that I didn't have time to worry about my problems. I was too busy trying to be the next grade. Okay, that was lucky.
Yeah.
You know, but for those other 2, we did not get their account of that experience because they would have told a story of devastation and confusion. You know, and I think it's really great to hear these accounts from these youth. I mean, I've read more than the 7 that I was assigned. I've read probably about, I don't know, 2/3 of them so far, and it's like I'm reading it in bed. It makes my partner crazy. She's like, quit reading these violent accounts. But I'm like, this is so moving. You know, this is so real time. You know, for these kids.
Yeah, one thing that's really great and helpful to hear you talk about those things, because that's one thing I've been wondering with this project, and I often wonder with projects that Cuatro Puntos does with organizations like this is, the effect on the students involved. For example, the 7 students who are reading their essays for this project, like what do you, I worry, is it a positive or a negative or a neutral effect on their lives? I mean, of course, they've already expressed it through, Do the Right Thing. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on them being able to express themselves through Do the Right Thing, and then, being able to further express it through a project like this. How is this going to play into their dialogue of their, recovery from this violence or their, future life? What basically how are we contributing, and is it the, positive, negative, neutral effect that we're contributing here? Because that's what I worry about.
I think that's a very valid concern, very, very valid concern. On any other project I'm involved with, and I'm involved with several, that we always have referral available for folks, because invariably, it's interesting. We've got one project for child abuse, and so we're talking to the kids, and we're not going to be surprised if a kid confesses that there was abuse or abuse that we didn't see, in their case. So we're ready for that. We've got counselors set up, they go. What we're not prepared for were parents telling us about the abuse they experienced and how it was still affecting them. Because we have to have the parents there. We don't do anything with children by themselves. Parents got to be there. But we've had several parents come forward and admit that they had, terrible abuse. And we realized in that moment, we need to have a referral for the parents. We had a child psychologist waiting, for the children, right? We did not have an adult psychologist waiting. And we now have that. I am concerned about this because, Dan is a lawyer, and this is not their area. So they're thinking about the law, But in my world, you always have to sort of be prepared for that. Although by now that has happened. If when you have a kid write something up, and it typically, if something's going to happen, it's pretty immediate. So that phase has probably already begun. And it's something that might even be worthy of asking the kids about, but then you have to have something in place for them.
Yeah.
You can't say, it's like, are you still in pain? And you have to have something in place for them. Now, ostensibly, my assumption is that they're in school systems, that this is not a disembodied program, and that if they are confiding continued problems and issues, that we can refer to their school systems to be able to get them support. Or even, because we probably have to have permissions for them to participate, that we can refer to their guardians. That's my assumption.
Yeah, I believe as far as I understand, they have all those networks in place through Do the Right Thing and the schools they partner with, because Dan is the chairman of the overall organization, but they had 85,000 students in chapters, cities and locations all over the country submit essays last year. And I believe that's one of their goals and aims is with each individual school and district and stuff. They make sure that, there's volunteer readers who read all the essays. And I believe they, from what Chris told me before, is that they do work with the schools and school psychologists and stuff to make sure that anything that needs to be addressed or looked into or whatever is taken care of. At least that's my understanding. The essays that we're dealing with are the 50 who've made it, that have been narrowed down from the 85,000 down to the 50 who are put in the Library of Congress. From what Lisa Cohn, another leader in the organization, was telling me, is that those also are some of the most active and vocal students among the 85,000 are the ones who made it to the end, and so they're very passionate about telling their story and speaking out, and we're very willing and on board, and she said they'll probably be very active chatting in the event and stuff on next Sunday. Because she said of everybody they work with, these are some of the most passionate and outspoken and involved. So.
And higher functioning. That I would be more. I mean, I'm literally thinking the same thing in terms of the quality of the writing. That I'd be much more concerned about kids whose writing was so deficient that their messages, are cryptic almost. Those are the individuals I think who are highest risk. But for the ones that we've selected, I mean, these are individuals who are very, very, as you said, outspoken, but I just sort of see them as also more capable in representing themselves.
One thing I think about a lot, and Amin and I've spoken about a lot, and I just speak with a lot of people all the time about, is this idea that you both were touching on earlier about the chain and the modeling of behavior. And I think about it, quite often with every, because I don't know if you're aware, but I lived and worked at a school in Afghanistan for many years. And, the Westerners, the few Western teachers, me and the few other ones, and then there were a lot of local teachers, we literally put up a sign in Persian, like when you walk into school, with like a picture of a ruler and a hand and like a no symbol. And it said, please remember not to hit the children today. Because that's like, similar to it's in Iraq, that's just the culture, and that's what's been passed down. And so what I think about and what I see a lot in Amin, and select other people is like you that's passed down, but then somewhere it's so hard to break that chain. And then, but sometimes you get someone who's like, able to see beyond their circumstance and be able to break that chain. So what I've been thinking and wondering is, of that 85,000 people, if these are like 50 students who are like doing it, like breaking the cycle of violence in their lives. I don't know.
I don't think they're alone, because, to the extent that parents had to give their permission, etc., that speaks to their families too, right? I mean, I can easily see a family who doesn't believe in confiding such things, etc., simply not giving permission.
True.
Easy.
Yeah.
I've had parents in at-risk communities who, when you approach, they say, "Are you the Department of Children and Families, the official protection department?" And if you say no, they're like, "Close the door." It's like, we don't have to talk to you. and so that tells you a lot about what's going on in that house. I'm very impressed with both of your credentials and your concern in a modern era. I'm a relatively old guy compared to you two, so it's inspiring to me that you're finding an active and productive way to help take this on, because every generation has to do this. It's easy to slip. We might actually have a golden age where we manage to lower violence amongst kids and violence in our culture, but it'll only last as long as we keep working on it, as history repeatedly reminds us.
Mm-hmm.
Usually in intact societies, they have this in hand. It's when there is disruption to a society that people begin to forget that being nonviolent is productive, that you get the most out of every generation. Your children are safer. Your society is more successful. Everyone has a better life. But if there are disruptions, that memory gets lost. And people go back to using whatever means possible to have power. Mm-hmm. And violence is a common method.
Yeah. We're very could talk all day about this, but thank you so much for
Sure, my pleasure.
For chatting with us, and we're looking forward to having you a part of the event and to, this isn't just going to be this one event, it's an ongoing thing. So I hope to have you involved as we do the album and just, start to publish the stuff around this and all of this, so that we can, you can help us be the check to make sure that, from we're only causing positive change and not, representing anybody in a way that's going to be harmful to them or to anybody else. So thank you so much for being involved and helping make this possible.
Well, it's my pleasure. I'm sure we'll work together
Yep.
and make this really great, and I look forward to it.
Yes, and thank you so much, Amin, for chatting with us, and
Thank you.
looking forward to it all. Thank you so much.